Abdullah sat on the park bench, tears streaming down his face as he buried his head in his hands. The phone call with Sarah had shattered his world. After 2 years together, she was leaving him for someone else. Her words still echoed in his mind. "I don't love you anymore. I want to be with Shamir." How could she be so cruel, so callous? After all they had shared, he had given her his heart fully and unconditionally, and now she had ripped it out and stomped on it. The pain was unbearable. He felt hollow inside, like a part of him had died. As he wept, an old man walking by stopped and sat down next to him. "Are you okay, son? You look like you could use some help," the man said kindly. At first, Abdullah rudely rebuffed him, wanting to be left alone in his misery. But the old man persisted, and Abdullah found himself pouring out the story of his heartbreak. The man listened patiently, then began to speak. "Ah, Dardy Dill, the pain of a broken heart. It is an inevitable part of life and love, especially when you are young. I too once loved a woman, beautiful as a fairy, but it was not meant to be. So love is pointless then, if it only leads to suffering?" Abdullah asked bitterly. The old man shook his head. "No, love is eternal. But people today are too caught up in the illusions and desires of the material world to recognize true love. They think they want it, but abandon it the moment something shinier catches their eye." He fixed Abdullah with an intense stare. "You have a light inside you, a purity of heart, that will guide you through the darkness, if you learn to trust it. Don't let the cruelty of the world extinguish it." Abdullah felt strangely comforted by the old man's words. Yes, he was heartbroken, but perhaps this was an opportunity to rediscover himself, to build a life of meaning beyond the superficial wants that drove so many. "Thank you," Abdullah said sincerely. "I didn't catch your name though. And where do you live? Perhaps we could talk again sometime." The old man laughed, a twinkle in his eye. "Remember, Sab Maya Hai, everything is an illusion." And with that, he disappeared, vanishing into thin air as if he had never been there at all. Abdullah blinked in disbelief. Had it been real, or a figment of his heartsick mind? He stared up at the fading clouds, suddenly unsure of everything he had once believed. The days turned to weeks, and the sharp sting of Sarah's betrayal slowly dulled to an ache that Abdullah carried in his chest. He returned to his routines, his software engineering job, his weekly football games with friends, the quiet rituals of his life as a 25-year-old man in Karachi. But the old man's words lingered, infusing Abdullah's existence with a new layer of meaning and mystery. He found himself paying closer attention to the world around him, wondering about the true nature of reality. During idle moments, his mind turned the cryptic message over and over, Sab Maya Hai. He took to walking in the park after work, retracing his steps to the fateful bench, hoping for another glimpse of the enigmatic stranger. But the old man never reappeared. Had Abdullah imagined their entire exchange? He began to doubt his own memories. Other aspects of Abdullah's life felt different too. His interactions with friends and family were tinged with a sense of unreality, like he was an actor just playing a role. At work, he went through the motions of coding and troubleshooting, but it all seemed rather meaningless, just a dance of digits in the illusory world. He found himself withdrawing from his social life, spending more time in solitary contemplation. He read voraciously books on Sufism, psychology, neuroscience, attempting to understand the nature of consciousness and the confounding statement that everything is Maya. When his childhood friend Imran invited him on a trek to Fairy Meadows, Abdullah initially declined, preferring his now habitual solitude. But Imran persisted, worried about him. "You've been so distant lately, Abdullah. It's not like you. Is this still about Sarah?" "No, it's not that," Abdullah sighed. How could he explain his existential disorientation? "Come with us. The mountain air will do you good," Imran coaxed. Reluctantly, Abdullah agreed. Perhaps a change of scene was what he needed to clear the mental fog. As their jeep wound its way up the precipitous roads towards Fairy Meadows, Abdullah found himself captivated by the majesty of the landscape, the snow-capped peaks of Nanga Parbat towering in the distance, the verdant alpine meadows, the ice-blue rivers rushing through ancient gorges. There was a crisp purity to the air that made Abdullah feel more awake and alive than he had in months. Breathing deeply, it was as if the atmosphere at altitude was infused with a mystical quality, carrying away the confusion and despair that had taken root in him. They set up camp in an emerald field strewn with wildflowers, Nanga Parbat's glacial peak looming above them. As Abdullah helped his friends pitch the tents and gather wood for a campfire, he felt a sense of camaraderie and connection that had been sorely missing. Imran, ever the storyteller, regaled them with tales and jokes over a dinner of instant noodles and chai. As the stars glittered in the clear night sky, laughter came easier to Abdullah than it had in a long time. "Aren't you glad you came?" Imran asked, slapping Abdullah on the back. Abdullah had to concede that he was. This was the most at peace he had felt since that devastating conversation with Sarah. In the morning, they set off on a hike to Nanga Parbat base camp. As they trekked across the rugged terrain, Abdullah marveled at the pristine beauty surrounding them. The floral meadows dappled with sunlight, the shaggy yaks grazing contentedly, the almost supernaturally blue sky. He breathed in the thin mountain air, feeling it sear his lungs. Lost in contemplation of the landscape, Abdullah didn't notice that he had fallen behind the others. He looked up to see that his friends were nowhere in sight on the rocky trail ahead. A tendril of worry crept in. These areas could be dangerous for a lone hiker. He decided to retrace his steps back to a fork in the path. But when he arrived at the juncture, he was confounded. Neither direction looked familiar. The panic rose as he spun around, seeing nothing but alien vistas of rock and snow in every direction. Nausea from the altitude roiled his stomach and a frigid wind knifed through his light jacket. He stumbled and fell to his knees, tasting bile at the back of his throat. "I warned you about straying from the path," a voice said with calm amusement. Abdullah looked up in shock to see the old man from the park standing over him, dressed not in ordinary clothes but in the ochre robes of a Sufi dervish, a long gray beard now adorning his face. What are you doing here?" Abdullah stammered through chattering teeth. The old man smiled enigmatically. "The better question is, what are you doing here? You wander through life, lost and disoriented, chasing illusions, ignoring the truth right in front of you." He reached down and Abdullah grabbed his surprisingly strong hand, allowing himself to be pulled back to standing. "I don't understand any of this," Abdullah said, frustration and fear warring within him. "Who are you really? What did you mean that everything is Maya?" "Walk with me," the old man said, heading down a trail that Abdullah could have sworn wasn't there a moment ago. With no other choice, Abdullah followed. As they walked, the dervish began to explain. "Maya is the illusory nature of the phenomenal world. Everything you perceive with your senses, everything you think and feel, is Maya, a dream, a mirage. The material world is a veil that obscures the true reality." Abdullah struggled to wrap his head around the concepts. "So nothing is real? My entire life is just a hallucination." "Yes and no. Your life, your identity, the things you chase, are all creations of the mind, manifestations of Maya. But beyond that illusion lies the eternal truth, the divine consciousness that is the source of all being. That is what is real." The landscape around them seemed to shimmer and shift as the old man spoke, the snowy peaks morphing into rippling sand dunes, then into lush jungle. Abdullah squeezed his eyes shut and shook his head. When he opened them, all was as it was before, or was it? "Your heartbreak over Sarah is a prime example of the suffering caused by Maya," the dervish continued. "You attached your identity and happiness to an illusory, impermanent relationship. Craving for what is fleeting and unreal will always lead to misery." "Then what's the point?" Abdullah asked hopelessly. "If everything I care about is just smoke and mirrors, why bother living at all?" The old man turned to face him, his eyes blazing with an otherworldly intensity. "Because beyond the veil of Maya lies the truth of your eternal being. You are not the limited ego that suffers and strives. Your true nature is pure, unbounded consciousness, the divine light of the universe. The purpose of life is to awaken to that reality." Abdullah's head reeled, his worldview thoroughly upended. Could it be true? Was everything he had believed just an elaborate mirage? He looked out over the sweeping panorama of the Himalayan foothills, wondering if the mountains too were mere figments of consciousness. The dervish seemed to read his thoughts. The phenomenal world is the manifest dream of the divine. The mountains, the rivers, the stars are all expressions of that infinite creativity. Maya is not to be rejected, but seen for what it is, a play of consciousness, an ever-shifting dance of form and emptiness. He turned to Abdullah with a piercing gaze. Your task is to wake up from the dream, to realize your true nature beyond the illusion. Only then will you be free from suffering, free from the fear of loss that has haunted you. Abdullah felt a strange sense of lightness, as if a heavy burden was lifting from his soul. The concerns that had consumed him, heartbreak, confusion, existential angst, seemed to dissolve in the crystalline air, revealed as the ephemeral phantasms they were. How do I do that? How do I wake up? He asked. The dervish smiled. The path is different for each seeker. Some pursue knowledge, some devotion, some service. But the key is to turn within, to quiet the chatter of the mind and discover the silent depths of your own being. There lies the answer to every question. He placed a hand on Abdullah's shoulder, his touch both comforting and electric. Trust the light inside you, the light of your eternal self. Let it guide you out of the mirage and into truth. The journey will not be easy, but it will be worth it. With those words, the dervish began to walk away, his form becoming progressively more translucent. Abdullah blinked, and he was gone, leaving no trace on the stony ground. Abdullah, there you are. Imran's voice rang out. Abdullah turned to see his friends hurrying towards him, their faces etched with concern. We lost you for a while there. Are you okay? Imran asked. Abdullah paused, considering the question. Was he okay? The encounter with the dervish had unmoored him, casting doubt on everything he had once believed. But at the same time, he felt a peculiar sense of clarity, a glimmer of understanding. Maya, illusion, the dream of the divine. He knew he was only scratching the surface of this ancient wisdom. But for the first time, he felt a sense of purpose, of direction. The heartbreak that had brought him low now seemed a necessary catalyst, a push to seek something higher. I'm okay, Abdullah said slowly. Actually, I'm better than okay. I feel different, like I'm seeing clearly for the first time. Imran raised an eyebrow. Sounds like the mountain air really did a number on you, buddy. Well, as long as you're good.
Abdullah similed.
Yeah, I'm good. Great, actually. Let's keep going. As he fell into step with his friends, he silently renewed his determination to pursue the path the dervish had shown him. He didn't know where it would lead, only that it was necessary, the only real thing in a world of fading clouds and shifting illusions. With each step, he felt lighter, the majesty of the mountains reflecting his own inner vastness. The search for truth stretched before him, daunting and thrilling. But he would not turn away, not until he had awakened from the dream, not until he had found the eternal light shining at his core. In that moment, the words of the dervish echoed in his soul, a mantra and a promise. Sab Maya Hai, everything is an illusion, and in that illusion, that grand play of consciousness, he would find his liberation.